Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.
New York State is ditching the mask mandate, at least for vaccinated people. Some are celebrating in a special way. NTD's Arian Pazdar shows us the mask burnings on the streets of Manhattan.
Yes, you heard that right. People have been burning masks in Midtown Manhattan, at least a few of them. Republican mayoral candidate Curtis Sliwa initiated the idea in order to celebrate the end of the mask mandate. He said it's hard to believe that masks were ever as helpful as some officials said they were.
When they didn't have enough masks for hospital personnel, for the doctors, the nurses, the orderlies, they said you don't need a mask. And they admitted that, including the Surgeon General. They lied to us. So why would I trust them anything they say thereafter? They admitted they lied once, and then Fauci's walking around with 2 masks on.
To make the whole event more festive, the Tramps performed their cult song Disco Inferno.
Oh, they did amazing. The Tramps it brings back childhood memories. And it was the perfect song as to what's going on today. Burn the mask.
From the beginning, when I was running, it was impossible to run and wear a mask. So I would sneak a little bit on the street.
It looks like the people here, not only the organizers but also the spectators, had already burned their masks mentally a few months ago. They only waited for the day to finally burn them publicly and tell the world it's time to breathe again. I'm Arian Pazdar, NTD News, New York.
And on the sunny Pacific shore of California, a privately owned radio station broadcasts a weekly show warning of the dangers of communism. The show particularly singles out the CCP, or Chinese Communist Party. We hear more from NTD's David Lamb.
People come to Santa Cruz to enjoy the ocean and sunshine. However, several Americans living here are working hard to deliver their message about the other side of the ocean.
He just made one offhand comment about Xi Jinping, and all of a sudden, he's in the process of losing everything.
It's a place full of lies. You know, you could say that same statement about every country in the world if you want.
KSCO is locally owned and operated. The president took ownership of the station in 1991. The station's broadband reaches a third of California's real estate and is accessible online. And the station has over 30 programs. They started a new program in September called China Uber Alice.
The purpose of our program is to let people know that communism, and Chinese communism in particular, is not a friend to the United States.
The hosts talk about U.S. and China relations as well as human rights abuses of Chinese citizens.
And I have no bones saying that. And I think a lot of other people are afraid to say that. Okay. I'm not afraid to say it. I think the CCP is evil. Evil.
Brainwash.
I understand why the Chinese government reacted the way it did.
I'm talking about it's a long term. Even I left China.
The China Uber Alice program usually starts with an anecdote from Amy Howe, who spent 10 years imprisoned in a CCP labor camp. She says if they don't talk about what China was like before the Cultural Revolution, nobody will know the damage the CCP has inflicted.
The next generation, they don't even know about. So I think I wanted to talk about those stories. I just don't want to bury it forever,
Howe said they received phone calls from listeners as far as Australia and New Zealand.
Even you get a free country, sometimes I nightmare, I wake up, I say, so glad I look everywhere, oh, this is America,
1949.
That's correct.
Right.
And that mind control has been in effect since 1949.
The show title, China Uber Alice, is a reference to a Nazi slogan.
The Nazi anthem, which was Deutschland über alles, which meant Germany over all. The idea that the Chinese Communist Party would like to see itself as being the dominant power in the world, it would be China over all, essentially.
China has more naval ships than the United States Navy now, right? So that's a threat.
The station's audience have spoken positively to the hosts for their show.
They've been saying that they like the idea that we're focusing on what China is up to around the world.
Listeners can tune in live every Thursday afternoon, 2 to 4 Pacific Time, or anytime on their website. Reporting in Santa Cruz, David Lamb, NTD News.
Art can act as a universal language and bring people together. But how can an artist achieve this goal? NTD's Christina Kim visits a studio in New Jersey to find out how one figurative sculptor does this.
This 25-foot bronze sculpture is called the Oracle, and it'll be here on display at the Rockefeller Center until June 29th. According to the artist, the installation is based on mythology, narrative, and mystery. But it's receiving mixed feedback online, with some saying there are better representations of African culture and art. We speak to a classical figurative sculptor for his insight. Sabin Howard and his team work at a studio in New Jersey. He's a classical figurative sculptor with more than 45,000 hours of experience. He says the Oracle isn't exactly the same as his type of art, but he's happy to see a figurative piece. He believes it'll spark dialogue about how art fits into a public space.
And I think that that is the beginning of a new road that we can all begin to have a conversation about.
Howard is currently working on a 58-foot-long World War I memorial. It tells a hero's journey before, during, and after the war, highlighting the emotions and the humanity of the experience. It's set to be revealed in Washington, D.C. on Memorial Day weekend 2024. We spoke about his philosophy on art, beauty, and the sacred. He described the earth. When you look from afar, it looks like one single unit. But when you zoom in closer, you see it's composed of many complex pieces. The process repeats itself all the way down to the microscopic level. Depicting this structure through art shows how humans and the world are interconnected. That is sacred and unifying.
That idea is the concept of the sacred, and that idea itself is the concept of beauty. Those two elements elevate us as human beings and remind us of what we really are and what we can be.
Howard's art focuses on visual depth, proportions, anatomy, structure, and design. He says his artistic education allows him to identify and break down these elements and put them together in a rich way. This way, his work can touch something below the surface and move the viewer from the mundane to the sacred. It makes the piece interesting, even for people who aren't into art.
And that's something that has been lost in the last 100 years. The art has deviated from the visual and gone more towards the conceptual in the book that you read about that art. It needs to return back to the visual, because visual art is first and foremost visual.
Howard is a traditional artist, but his art lives in the modern day. He references live models while he sculpts, which he believes will elicit a fresh, visceral response from viewers. Howard says if humanity looks at the world in a more holistic, less divisive way, we would have more room for unity, creativity, and productivity. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Metropolitan Oregon and rural Oregon are worlds apart, and thousands of Oregonians are hoping to get a state boundary line drawn between them. They're not trying to create a new state, but to join their conservative neighbor, Idaho. And the movement is growing. Here's the details.
5 rural Oregon counties just voted to leave the state and become part of Idaho, one of the most conservative states in the nation. They joined 2 other counties that voted for the move last year. Growing support for the movement comes as thousands of rural Oregonians feel that their values aren't being represented.
Rural Oregon and urban Oregon are distinctly different in values.
Mike McCarter is the president of Move Oregon's Border, the group behind the movement. While cities like Portland embrace progressive policies and violent riots have become the norm, McCarter says rural communities simply want to preserve their traditional way of life.
Rural Oregon is a traditional value area where people are believing in faith, family, freedom. They're attached to their communities, they're attached to their land. But yet when situations in the legislature pass laws to deal with urban Oregon, it affects us here. And so we feel that we're better aligned with the rural communities and the traditional values of Idaho.
The Portland metro area is home to 47% of Oregon's voters, but covers less than 4% of the state's landmass. Big city voters overwhelmingly support progressive policies which raise taxes, increase government regulation, and impact the education system across the state. And it's not only Oregon that's battling with the urban-rural divide. The divide's been growing across America for decades, and the contrast is becoming increasingly stark. A map of the 2020 presidential election is a good illustration. With the exception of a few states, a majority of U.S. counties voted red, while most of the country's big cities voted blue.
I'm talking to people across the United States who are dealing with similar issues that we're dealing with here in Oregon. And it is a clash between urban and rural. We try not to think about it on a political line. It's more of a traditional value line that people who live in rural areas have a different set of standards and values that their life is surrounded with.
The bid to move the state's lines is seen as a long shot, since it would require a formal vote in the Democratic-controlled Oregon legislature, and the U.S. Congress needs to ratify it. But McCarter is optimistic because he says it's actually a win-win for both urban and rural Oregon. For now, the movement's just seeking to get the process started. McCarter says they expect 4 or 5 states to make the vote in the next election.
A retired French general is praising former President Trump's leadership, saying Trump has set an example he would follow himself, and that Trump's achievements as president will be remembered in history. NTD's France correspondent David Vives met with the general.
In an interview with NTD on Tuesday, retired French General Antoine Martinez said he's looking forward to the return of former President Trump.
It seems like they were all wrong to say Donald Trump did not make history and that people would soon forget him. In my opinion, he's now breaking new ground for the Republican Party. Who knows what will happen in 4 years?
Over 120 retired U.S. generals and admirals criticized the new administration's socialist policies in an open letter last week. They also raised concerns over the integrity of the 2020 general elections. Their letter came out after retired French generals also put out an open letter addressing their government. 20 retired generals in France wrote in late April that French government leaders should try to get their honor back and defend patriotism. They went on to say that France is facing a mortal threat due to gang wars and a spike in violence across the country. Martinez says although the two letters are different in content, they both reflect military leaders' concerns with their respective country.
Maybe we inspired them. I guess these generals must have read our letter. They are very different though. Our letter is a warning and a wake-up call.
The general says the leftist agenda is challenging not only France's, but also other Western countries' will to defend their core values and their identities.
There is a financial oligarchy that is in power, not just in France, but also in other countries. It's something that follows the Davos Group ideas, a Davocracy. This oligarchy's objective is to remove all borders and create what they call the new man, destroy the connection existing between people and people's connection with their own history.
Martinez adds that he would run for president in France as a way to deliver his message on patriotism. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.